Okay, sorry it's taken me a little while to get out, but I've just been swamped and answering some specific questions and some other things on my agenda to do. So anyway, this tutorial is about the materials. I'm just going to run over what I covered in class, really just a few core basic things that you need to know for this exercise, for this assignment. And so you can make your own custom materials, you can find them, and just want to go over kind of how you do that from within SketchUp. And then I'll do another brief tutorial about the components. Again, that's pretty straightforward, just a matter of finding them. And I'll show you how to make the 2D components. And after you understand how to use the images, that'll kind of round things out. So hopefully it's not too late for you. Sorry it took a while to get out. All right, so the basic things I want to talk about with materials is it's one of the things that SketchUp was designed to do, to give you a chance to actually put materials on surfaces and see what they look like as design elements as you design. And so it's quite good at bringing in relatively low resolution images. The largest image size you can use is 1024 by 1024 pixels. And you don't usually have to go that big for something like these materials, which are tiling. So if I get my paint bucket tool, or you can click on the paint bucket or type B, if I hold the Alt key down, I can pick up a material like the sand. And if I click on here, you can see that it just repeats it across the surface. And this is not too bad, but you can see the seams in here a little bit. If I pick this one up, that's actually a lot better, and it's easier because it's just a tiled image, so it's not too hard to make that seamless. If I put this one on here, that actually works pretty well too. It's really, you see this little repeating pattern right there a little bit, but it's actually quite good, especially when you zoom out. So we'll talk a little bit about how you, if you want to make your own seamless tiling texture, a couple Photoshop techniques to do that. But basically you can go online and search for seamless textures or tiling material textures or brick texture, but just use the terms either seamless or tiling. Otherwise, you'll get a bunch of random images of bricks or stone or pavers or whatever it might be, excuse me, or ground cover, but they're not going to line up. And there's, like I said, ways you can fix that in Photoshop. But again, for this assignment, if you're just getting to this now and you're not sure what to do, just find ones online or use ones that are built into SketchUp. So one of the other things you can do with materials is once you get them on here, and let's pick this tile back up again because it'll be a little easier to see. Each one of these textures is created at a certain size and it has a certain dimension for the tile that gets repeated. Again, with the sand, you can kind of see that this square right looks like right here, 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 here. That's kind of the square that gets repeated. This, I don't actually know whether it's one tile or it might be 4 tiles, but it's either, it's either a quadrant or it's a single tile that gets repeated. But that might not be exactly the size you want. What if you're, well, let's draw a shape here. What if you're paving material. All right, hold the shift key down, get the inference, there we go. So if we want our tile lined up with that surface, painting this isn't really going to work, right? Because it doesn't line up with it. And the early versions of SketchUp, there wasn't anything you could do about that. But what they've done is added a feature that if you right click, go to texture and choose position, okay, so just right click on the surface, texture, position. Now you can drag this around, but you can also use this green push pin. I can rotate that around so that now that basically is snapping to that increment. And then I can kind of move this over and try and line that up. All right, so these other ones, this is the move, which is kind of redundant because you can move it with this. This is skew, so if this isn't quite lining up, I could skew it around a bit, but generally speaking, and this is kind of skew perspective one direction. There's different ways to apply images. If you use photographic images like for a facade or the front elevation of a house, these can come in handy. But for this type of plan top-down symbol, usually I just use the green one because you can rotate it to the angle and you can scale it to the size you want. When you're done, you just right-click and choose Done. So now once I've picked that up, I can always go back to my paint bucket. I can pick that up and I can apply it to any material. And I could save that as a new material if I want to. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. But basically, that's how we use textures in SketchUp. You apply it, and then if you want to adjust a particular texture, here you're only adjusting the texture on that surface. It doesn't affect the original texture. If I go back here and pick this up, I can, oops, paint bucket, Alt key, and you can place that texture straight back on there. Now, if you want to modify this texture, let's say I like the tile pattern, but I don't really like the color. Well, I have that as the active. If I open my materials, and that will open automatically when you choose the paint bucket, or you can go to Window and look for materials right here. I can go in and click the Edit button, and so I can adjust the lightness or darkness. If I want this clear, in this case, it's not. Because of the colors that are in it, that's not working too well, but you can adjust it if you want to make it a little warmer or cooler. If I wanted to bring in, you can see right here, this uses a texture, and it's called Stone Harbor Moss JPEG. If I want to load another one, I can click on that and say, well, let's make this a brick pattern, and you'll notice that everything that this was based on just changed. So if I don't really want that to happen, what I need to do first is to go up here and click on this button that says Create Material. So this gives me a second window, and in this window I have the same harbor stone, and I'm going to call this brick herringbone. Okay, and now I'm going to come down here and click on my little folder icon, choose those pavers, and again, this is like 16 feet by 16 feet, so that seems pretty big if you ask me. But so we could scale that down if we want, but you get the idea. The texture is now saved under this name, and it's part of this document. If I don't like the size of that, I can go back in here and say, well, let's see if we take that down to 8 feet. That's going to scale it down. If I want to make it down to 4 feet, it's going to scale it down even more. So that gives us an idea. And usually when we're working in here, let's pull our components window up. All right, let's just put a person in here. So you can see based on this right now, that's still pretty big brick, and that's what I would expect, because a brick pattern is usually just a small piece, so it might be just a couple feet or a foot in each dimension. So I could keep coming in here and just visually say, let's make this 2 feet. That's getting a little more if I zoom in on that. That's still a pretty big brick, right? So what if I go down to 1 foot? Yeah, that looks a little more like it. So you can adjust those in the material palette. You can adjust opacity. Of course, if it's brick, we want it to be completely opaque, so we're not going to test that. If you bring in a black and white image, you can actually colorize it. So if I do this, I don't know, I can change the brick pattern. So it basically shifts it into one color, and otherwise I can change it around. So that's part of the idea. You could put this brick in, you like the pattern, say, well, I want it more yellow, more red, and experiment with your design ideas in real time on the screen. And there's not that many programs that actually can do that. Okay, it's not super high, it's not photorealistic quality completely, but it does allow you to experiment with those, with the scale, the color, the lightness or darkness of a texture. Now I'm going to make another one just so maybe this makes a little more sense. So I'm going to choose New. I'm going to call this Lawn. And click on the book here, on the folder. And let's see. There's my grass striped lawn. I'm going to add that in. Okay, reset the color and click. Well, I might make this a little bit bigger. Let's make this 5 feet. Get my paint bucket, and you can see I've got kind of a striped lawn pattern. Now, one of the things, this works great for planar surfaces, which all these are. So you can make as many types of materials as you want. Again, use a JPEG, PNG files, anything like that you can use. They don't have to be huge files. Then 500 pixels by 500 pixels, something like that is fine. The problem is if I pick up this texture and apply it to this landform, or even to this which has sloped surfaces on it, you'll see that none of those surfaces really line up, because the smoothness, every time it hits another faceted surface, it changes the orientation of the pattern. And that's not really going to help us if we want this to be a landform that shows the mown grass stripes going up and down. But what I can do is come down to my original one, select it, right click, choose texture, projected. And what that does is means it's just like it's being projected out of a video projector, and it just drapes it across whatever it's hitting. So if I alt click on this and pick that up and click, now you can see it's like it's being projected straight down from above, and the stripes kind of go up and down that undulating landform exactly as we would expect them to. And you might see a little distortion here and there, but again, from the top, if I got this in total top view without, if I go to top view, top view and parallel projection, it looks perfectly flat. Because if I straighten everything out and get rid of the perspective, it looks just like the original pattern down here. But when you look at it in perspective and you turn perspective on, then you start seeing a little distortion from the sides. But that's how we're going to do that. And that type of texture is what I want you to use for the waterfront park project. Everything that's on the landform surfaces, since they're smooth, like the one we just looked at right here, they need to be turned into projected texture. So create them off to the side with little rectangular planar surfaces. Once you've got it scaled, look at this and scale it till it's the right size, because if I right click on this, I have no option to scale it. I have to do that on this one. If I right click, I can go to texture, position, and I can rescale it. And just because I rescale this doesn't mean it changes this. I have to pick it back up and put it back down, and now I have the bigger stripe. So if you do that on a little test surface first, then convert it texture, projected, and then once it's a projected surface, then you can pick it up and place it on your landforms. Okay, so make sure you use projected textures. You'll definitely lose some points if you don't do that, and that's just good visualization technique, and you always want to have that type of texture placed on there. Okay, I think I'm going to pause there for a second. I thought the last thing I would do before I close out this tutorial is just, I didn't really have a chance to check on this in class, but I just wanted to switch over to 3D Warehouse, and there are indeed lots of, if I typed in material textures, then you could probably type in brick texture, wood texture, specific things, but if you look here, there's actually quite a few textures that, there's a container, there's brick, there's glass, steel, combinations of different things. There's even one here that has a bunch of building facades, which you could use to repeat across the face of some simple geometry to get background infill buildings for the background of one of your models. So definitely look on 3D Warehouse. You might find if you're looking for some specific ones. Again, in this exercise, I've given you the opportunity to pick what textures you want. Just again, if you're going to bring them in, apply them to a flat planar surface, then convert them to projected, then apply them to the landform. Even if it's the walkways, anything that has that soap skin on it, even if it looks perfectly flat, it's still, if it's been smoothed, it needs to have a projected pattern. All right, hopefully that'll help you get going with your textures, and I'll do another one shortly about the components.